Well, since it is 11:01, I will go ahead and get us started. Good morning. You have joined room 3, which is the Building Bridges Youth Peer Support breakout session. So hopefully you are in the correct place and intentionally joined this breakout session. Again, it's good to see all of you here today. This session is not going to have a PowerPoint. We aren't going to be sharing screens. It really is just an open discussion with some targeted questions to our panelists, and then we'll have some opportunity at the end for you guys to ask questions as well. So for those of you in the room who don't know me, I am Karen Grabowski. I am in the Office of Child and Family Services at the Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Services. I've been with the Office of Child and Family Services for about 2 years now. Prior to that, I worked at the Middle Peninsula Northern Neck Community Services Board for almost 11 years and have had experiences there where I was able to oversee the high fidelity wraparound program, including some youth support partners at that agency. So this topic is very near and dear to my heart. And so I'm really excited to be here with everyone this morning. Liz, are there any Virginia Tech logistics that we need to cover before we jump into introducing our panelists?
No, I think we're good. Just the standard housekeeping. We encourage you to add questions into the chat that we'll monitor those. Please be sure to remain muted unless the panelist asks you to unmute for a question. And then we encourage you to keep your camera on so we can know you're engaged with us.
Perfect. Thank you. So before we get into the actual questions, I just want to remind us of some of our learning objectives for this session and introduce our panelists. So we're really hoping to just talk about strategies and considerations involved in developing effective peer support specific for youth with substance use disorders. Talk about the techniques and approaches for successfully implementing youth peer support and developing a comprehensive understanding of how to empower youth on their path to recovery through youth peer support. So those are just brief learning objectives. So I will start by introducing Tim. Tim Howell is the Juvenile Justice Mental Health Court Liaison Manager, as well as the Mentoring and Uplift Manager for Western Tidewater Community Services Board. He graduated from Hampton University in 1984, earning a BA in psychology. He's been employed with Western Tidewater CSB for 38 years. In that time, he has held numerous positions, including operations and management in the areas of day support, intellectual and developmental disabilities and mental health, case management, both mental health and IDDD, residential, mentoring, in-home, adult mental health support services, and at an adult behavioral health assisted living facility. Mr. Howell also serves as a facilitator for 2 parenting classes, Strong African American Families and Nurturing and Parenting. In addition, Mr. Howell has been certified as a gang specialist. Mr. Howell has shown a lifelong commitment to working with individuals and families to help them achieve their goals and quality of life. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. Our second panelist is Stephanie Harrell. She's a licensed clinical social worker, has been practicing for almost 30 years, working with individuals who have been diagnosed with mental health and substance use disorders. She attended Virginia Tech, the College of William & Mary, Old Dominion University, and Norfolk State University. She was a Child Mental Health Fellow and a Rhodes Scholar candidate and graduated in 1994 with a master's degree in clinical social work. She has served in various positions in nonprofits to include the Regional Director of Catholic Charities in Northeastern North Carolina, and has held various leadership positions at a number of CSBs in Tidewater area. She was also an adjunct professor at Christopher Newport University in Newport News. At the present time, she is happily working at Western Tidewater CSB as the Criminal Justice Program Supervisor. She loves to laugh and wishes for a world that is trauma-informed. Right there with you, Stephanie. Thanks for joining us this morning. And lastly, on our panel is Christine Heaton. She is a behavioral health manager and youth outpatient services for Fairfax Falls Church Community Services Board in Northern Virginia. She's a licensed professional counselor, as well as a licensed marriage and family therapist in Virginia. She's provided therapeutic services to the Fairfax County community for 30 years in various roles with the Community Services Board and in private practice. Christine's passionate about improving the well-being of youth and demonstrates this daily. She believes all youth deserve to have meaningful lives. Christine was curious about the use of lived experiences within behavioral health services. She saw the value in supporting others in reaching recovery goals, while also being able to share this with someone who has lived through similar situations to those they support. When an opportunity was presented to develop and implement a youth peer support program, she jumped at the chance to manage this. While the CSB only has one youth peer support specialist, Christine is an advocate for more positions and growing the program. Outside of work, Christine is shoe obsessed and lives under the motto of Carpe Diem. She enjoys hiking, reading, and spending time with loved ones. So welcome to our panelists, and I'm excited for the conversation we're about to have. Thank you so much for joining us this morning, Christine. We are going to jump right into our first question. And Christine, I think you're going to take the lead on answering this one. So what role is the youth support partner playing in your agency? How did you decide on these program components or use of the peer in this manner? And how do you believe this will impact adolescents' participation and engagement in substance use treatment?
Hi, everyone. Welcome. So Fairfax Falls Church Community Services Board is one of the largest CSBs within the state of Virginia. And we receive public safety referrals for youth who have had a suspected overdose. And so this is where the police department or fire and rescue are reaching out to us and saying, hey, this youth had a suspected overdose. Can you reach out to the family and try to link them to services? And so I want to give you that as the framework in which we kind of decided what to do with this. So far to date for 2023, we've had 146 public safety referrals. So 146 known suspected opioid overdoses for youth. And so we had to come up with a criteria to figure out how to really link and assign our peer support. And so we looked at these public safety referrals, and we wanted to definitely link these kids to the peer support specialist. Now, our peer support specialist started in September and in November started getting cases. And so we're looking for youth who have had a non-fatal overdose or some type of substance use crisis, and a priority being multiple overdoses. And then also second tier would be like a youth isn't engaged and they continue to be at risk. And so wanting again to have more additional support for them. We have a small youth medicated assistant treatment clinic that we are working to expand, which should be expanded by the summertime, which is really exciting. And so that program has a lot of supports. And so if a kid is linked to that program, we're not necessarily assigning them to a peer support because there are other supports within that program. And then we really wanted to look at just what are the benefits of a youth peer with lived experience. So we're talking about a young adult. Our peer is somebody who is in graduate school, early 20s, and she offers a lot of hope and insight into the journey of recovery and that connectedness, the ability to walk alongside and not just be another adult telling the youth what they need to do. So she helps advocate and also really encourages the youth to have a voice, which is so important, particularly in, we're a treatment program, so very clinical. We do service plans, they're clients and this and that. For her, it's different. They are individuals. She is meeting them where they are. She is not, Catherine's shaking her head as a youth peer support specialist in Virginia. And she's meeting them where they are and has just the ability to walk alongside, which I think is really important. Shared understanding. Again, most youth feel like adults just don't understand. And it is true, right? I can say, oh yeah, I lived that many years ago, but I don't know what it's like to be a youth now and all the challenges that they have. So she's also a resource for the youth, and then also continuing to help them build skills, support them while they're doing so, whether it's communication skills, conflict resolution, helping them get to where they need to be. She met with somebody last week who said, I don't even know who my clinician is. And so she said, okay, let's figure this out, right? And so just having that ability for somebody to reach out and text her and say, hey, I'm not doing so well today. And for her to say, okay, I'm here. How can I listen? Has been really great. And so we're just hoping, because this population is so difficult to engage with, at least in our area, we're finding that she can help that youth find the support, find that hope, and move forward through their journey of recovery.
Thanks, Christine. I have so many messages from Tanya this morning that like connect with this of like, why would these young people be easy to engage or easy to trust clinicians or easy to really want to be involved in all these services? It's hard. And so the fact that there's this young person who can really be more someone who walks alongside them, someone they can build some of that trust with, someone who can say, I am that trusted person, sounds like it's brought some benefit, even in the brief time that you've had this youth support available. So thanks
Absolutely.
for sharing.
I'll tell people, like, so I'm licensed, I have 2 licenses. I have 0 street cred when it comes to youth, right?
Yeah.
Nobody has street cred unless they allow you to have it. And so you have to be able to connect with them. But just because I'm a therapist means nothing. Just because you're a police officer, it means nothing, right? If you don't know what it's like, it is very difficult for these kids to trust. And we heard about it this morning. Why should I, right? I haven't had a trusting adult in my world so far. And you know what? You're not there. I had a client one time who came in and said, you're therapist number 7, and I'm pretty sure there's going to be number 8. And I just looked at her, and in my head, I thought, challenge accepted, and just worked on building that relationship. And sure enough, there wasn't a number 8. And so, but I really had to make that commitment to do it, because again, 0 street cred, and so there is some street cred with a young person meeting somebody else saying, hey, I've been in your shoes.
Yeah. Before we move on, Stephanie or Tim, anything to share from how Western Tidewater is implementing their youth support partner?
Well, I wanted to say, when we were going to be on this panel, I started doing some research at SAMHSA, and the statistics are just dismal. They said 10% of youth who need substance abuse treatment get it. And of those 10%, after a year, 80% relapse, okay? So obviously we're doing something wrong, or we're not doing enough, which is why we are so happy that we got the funding and we were able to implement the peer that we have now. And I don't know, Tim, if you want to add anything about that.
No, no.
Okay.
Yeah. Stephanie, you sparked me to think about SAMHSA actually recently just came out with a new tip. Their like treatment protocol PDFs, and it's on kind of recovery counseling, and it does speak to the role of peer support in that. And so if you've never been to SAMHSA's tip, they have so many wonderful resources on protocols, some of them specific to peer services, some of them specific to recovery counseling and the use of peer services alongside that. So just wanted to put that out there, that SAMHSA does have some really great information available on this topic. All right. Our second question for the panel today what made your agency interested in pursuing hiring a youth support partner? And how important does your agency see this role in helping youth explore paths to wellness?
So I know, I know at Western Tidewater, we had seen the success that the adult peers had brought to the engagement and treatment. We noticed that clients who were working with the peers, they had decreased involvement in the criminal justice system, less need for emergency services, were more engaged in therapy. So we wanted to bring that to our youth. The other thing too is, I'm in my 50s, so having a youth come in and talk to me, I'm some old lady, right? So bringing in somebody their age who understands, like you were talking about, Karen and Christine, their world is so different. We move so fast. They dealt with the pandemic, we did too, but we weren't school age, we didn't miss out on that. So I think bringing somebody in who understands where they're coming from, and like Christine said, has street cred, is definitely a game changer for these youth.
Tim, do you want to add anything to that?
Well, yes, and I do have to apologize. My computer has been working. I think the question was, what has our agency, what made us interested in pursuing hiring the youth support? I think here at Western Tidewater, we had started implementing the adult peer support services about 6 to 7 years ago, and we saw the benefits of that, whether it was through personal testimony or through observing the progress that the consumers made that were working with the peer support staff. As Stephanie talked about, we were familiar with the data that showed the number of kids that end up relapsing and coming back into the system. And so given the fact that, we saw the benefits of peer support, we thought it was good if we could add a youth peer. But it was no funding source.
I think we do have an internet issue at Western Tidewater sometimes. So I'll take over for Tim that when we did get the funding.
I guess, can you hear me now?
Yes, go ahead.
Again, I'm not sure how much you all heard, but we decided to implement the program because we saw the success that we were having with our adult peer specialist program.
Tim?
Long story short, we did get the funding, and we did implement starting to get a youth peer. So we were very lucky.
Let me try jumping there again. We Stephanie mentioned the funding that we received for the peer, but we received a grant from DVH maybe 3-4 years ago for a youth substance abuse program, which was very effective. We saw the benefits of that. The kids would go through the program, and we work a lot with court-ordered youth, juvenile justice, probation and parole. And so they would go through that program. They would do well while they were in treatment. They'll be drug-free and complete the course, and the charges be dismissed. But maybe a year later, they might show up again with either new charges or back, for still using substance abuse. So we knew that the program was somewhat effective. And again, that grant ran out, but it's self-sustaining now, so we're still able to provide that youth substance abuse program, but we knew we needed an additional piece. The initial grant allowed for mentors to be a part of the program, But again, I may be one of the oldest people on the line. I don't mind telling my age. I'm 62. Y'all talking about y'all 60, 50. So I'm even further removed from these youth than many of you. So a lot of our mentors were older individuals in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, and they did well, but I don't think they had that real connection with the youth, that they were really walking beside them. I think they were more so directing them and giving them instructions, and the youth saw that they were just another adult trying to tell them what to do and how to live their lives. So the grant came, we were informed about this grant to hire peer specialists. We jumped on it. Again, not really fully understanding all the details of getting it up and running, even though we had an adult program. And again, I was familiar with our adult program, but I didn't work in it. I didn't really understand all the benefits of the peer specialist. But even as I've been educating myself, I understand the benefits and how this would be real beneficial to our substance abuse program.
Thanks, Tim. It makes me really excited about tomorrow's breakout session. John is coming, I think he's in Texas, and he was he created the first alternative peer group, and he's going to speak to us tomorrow about alternative peer groups in a breakout session. So what it speaks to, Tim, is that process of you go through these 10, 12 weeks of counseling, but the foundation of recovery really takes more time than that, right? A solid foundation to really promote recovery and wellness goes far beyond just counseling, limited amount of counseling sessions. And so having these peer services or these peer groups where you can really continue to work on that for a longer period of time really increases the likelihood of remaining in recovery and working towards paths of wellness. Yeah, so thank you both. One of the hopes that we have at DBHDS is that youth peer services will grow throughout Virginia. So with that in mind, how did your agency prepare for a youth peer when the only experiences the agency had was with adult peers or family support partners? And in this preparation and during this time of having a youth support, are there any specific major differences that other agencies should know if they are considering adding youth support partners?
I think that one's mine. Lots of differences. And so, you know, we, for Fairfax, decided, like, why wouldn't we bring in other supports for our youth? And then it's also evidence-based. So Fairfax CSB is all about evidence-based practices. And so those kind of prompted us to look at this. But from recruiting to hiring, major differences. We had to advertise for this position about 4 times and finally got somebody the 4th time. Not that, and we did a couple of rounds of interviews. We are looking for a youth peer support specialist. So when an older person comes to the interview, they're already, I'm sorry, not going to get the position, right? But it's very hard. You cannot advertise and say, you must be between this age and this age. And so that is a real challenge. And that was one that was very frustrating. And then I find myself, like, at the 3rd interview, I'm like, well, she's older, but I think she could do it. And then it was like, you know, and then the back of my head was like, no, wait, there's keep looking. And so that took a lot. It took a lot of just preparation. We had a consultant that we're continuing to work with who has youth peer support program that is well established and is going really well. And so I have been tugging on her ear every time I have a question. Lots of training for myself. I was the first cheerleader, basically, and I needed to get other people on my cheerleading team and was successful in doing that, but I needed to have education. I'm a therapist. I took a lot of trainings to make sure that I was really clear. What does a peer support do? And then what does a youth peer support do? And what are those differences? We had to build a new infrastructure. Our adult program is well established, works very, very well. That's for adults. They typically don't work with guardians and parents and everything. And so we had to create a whole new program and also make sure that there was some overlap too. And then we had to come up with their criteria. How were we going to assign cases? We had to come up with a referral process, definitely continued partnership with the adult peer support program, educating the teams, all the outpatient teams, on what is a youth peer support. We had been working with family peer support partners, and that was, pretty clear, but this is a young person. And so helping them understand that and then integrating that work. So here's the peer work with the outpatient team. That has been somewhat of a challenge. I will send an email saying, hey, so-and-so has been assigned to the case. She's now part of this team. And then I'll see emails where she's not on those emails. And I'm like having to go back and say, she's part of the clinical team. If you're meeting, she meets. If what else can I do to support this? I've had to reach out and say, have you heard from this clinician? And she'll say no, and it's been a couple weeks. And then I go behind the scenes and say, come on, let's integrate her. So we are also continuing education and support for the clinical teams, making sure they're really aware, making sure they're aware of the limitations. And then just overall, keeping in mind that, again, this is a young person. And so sometimes clinicians, families will look at her and say, what is she doing here? She looks like a client. Mm-hmm. And she's younger. And so, depending on what she's wearing on any particular day, I agree, client, right? And then you hear from her and you recognize this is not a client. This is somebody who is in full recovery, who is bringing their enthusiasm and their hope with them. And so there's just been a lot of things that we've had to prepare for and then continuing to adapt. Our electronic health record, we had to create a new program in there, and the documentation and making sure that, again, everybody was well educated. And now, since she's taking cases, it's now dealing with the bumps in the road and moving forward. But it's been great, and I wouldn't change it. And I'm pleased to say that Fairfax has 2 additional positions for a youth peer support coming. And so I'm hoping that we have our own little youth peer team, and can't wait to see where that goes.
Yeah, Christine, and I appreciate your honesty that it's a lot of work, right? Like, as the supervisor, this is a lot of prep work pre-hire, during the hiring process, and then the work of really helping this young person establish themselves as a professional within the agency, that you had knowledge that there could be some barriers and challenges around this. The fact that you're monitoring some of those emails and making sure the professionals are recognizing this youth support partner as a professional, as an equal, not a hierarchy, right? I, clinician, am here and you peer support are here, but we are partners in serving this youth and trying to help them in their recovery and wellness. And that takes a lot of passion. So one of the things I hear you saying is, if you're going to prepare for this, be passionate about it too. Yeah. Stephanie, Tim, anything to add to that?
I would say, education too with the stakeholders, like, talking about somebody looking like a client. We actually had an incident where somebody from the court had called and wanted to know who this person was, that they looked like a client. So kind of educating the courts and everything about what the role of a peer is. It's evidence-based. So doing a lot of education with them also. And now that we were able to do that, the court is on board, probation's on board, our truancy is on board. So, again, it's a lot of education. And I think the other thing too is for those of us who are working with peers, and it's kind of new for us too, is to kind of helping them, because, everybody needs to be reminded of boundaries, right? Because it can get very, very tricky, especially working with, youth, and now we got social media. Is also kind of educating and helping the peers understand their role, and where maybe, looking back at our experience where we kind of landed on the landmines, and maybe, our boundaries weren't as secure as they needed to. So helping them navigate that too. That's an important piece of this, I think.
I think also, if I could add, with our agency, we have a peer that started out as a peer specialist, but has been promoted up to manager as part of the recruitment team and the hiring process. So, I mean, we have input from a peer, even in hiring new peers, because they could bring a perspective that we might not have.
Great. Thank you. There are a couple of questions that have come up in the chat that I feel like we may as well just tackle and answer now. The first one, Western Tidewater, you guys just have the one YSP, is that correct?
That's correct.
And then the question.
Well, let
Go
me
ahead.
correct that. We have another program that's starting that there's a youth peer specialist that's part of it. So we actually have two. They're two separate programs, but there is another program that will have a youth peer specialist. I think they're still in the process of trying to hire that individual.
Yes, because you guys are opening up a adolescent IOP, correct? And that's where that youth will.
That's correct.
Okay. Very nice. What ages do you feel is best for this position?
We struggle with that, because at first we were thinking, because of our hiring process, they were mainly focusing on older peer specialists. So there was very few coming in that lower range. But as similar to Christina, our person is 21 years old. So that seemed to be a good number for us. I think we looked as going as high as maybe 25. But 21 kind of worked out. That was who we were able to hire.
And I think national best practice suggests somewhere between 18, 30, kind of at the max. And again, talk about going back to prep, right? This is all conversations with your HR people, because you can't ask about age, and you can't do those kinds of things in a hiring process.
Yeah.
So how do you land? And I think 18 is a young age to start in this. I think most 18-year-olds are not in the most stable, reliable, dependable. I surely was not the most at age 18. So it kind of goes back to some of that preparation and planning about where does your agency see this? If you have a really responsible 18-year-old show up to an interview, I think that's something that is possible and doable. But again, all goes back to, how do you then prepare? Is this young person's very first job? What then onboarding needs to look different than an employee who's coming in as their third, fourth job? Do they even understand the structure of what the human resources department is and who they are? And, there's going to be a little bit more training that goes into that. So just some considerations. The other question about age was, would someone then age out of being a YSP, and what would that position then look like? Christine, Stephanie, and Tim, I know you guys are still pretty new with this.
I just threw another thing for us to think about.
I know.
Thank goodness I have, I don't know, maybe 8 more years. Great question. And I don't know what that answer is. I think some of it is personality of the individual and what they bring to the table. Are they getting tired of working with youth? Do they still feel like they can make that connection and that youth are responsive to them? I think it's a collaborative conversation with somebody who's getting older. and then, you know, moving from there. And I wanted to comment on the 18-year-old. I think it also depends on where they are in their own recovery. You can have somebody who, you know, started recovery 12, 13, 14. And so their lived experiences may make them more mature than a typical 18-year-old, typical, whatever that is. But that is a great question. I'm going to continue to ponder it. And again, pleased that I have like 8 years to go.
And I've had the fortunate benefit, the University of Connecticut has actually put on some like youth support and youth driven webinars. And so they actually covered this at one point in time about it not being a surprise and being an ongoing collaboration with that youth support partner around like, what are your professional development goals? Do you want to move into a manager position? Do you want to move into an adult peer support position? What does that look like? But it isn't all of a sudden the day you turn 30 and things must shift. It's this collaboration between the youth peer support and their agency and supervisor in an ongoing way. And so it's not surprising information. And I think what they kind of were sharing is because they get the importance of a youth peer support being someone close in age with some similar lived experience, it tends to be a well-received conversation of at some point in time, this job will need to change, and what can we help with? What can we support with in your professional development plan? Yeah. So yes, Christine, you have 8 years to have that conversation. Is there a separate certification for the YSP in Virginia compared to the Certified Peer Recovery Specialist certification? There is not currently. We are working on a youth peer support Virginia curriculum. It will not replace the peer recovery specialist curriculum. It will be in and I don't want to say endorsement, maybe an endorsement. It'll be an additional training after the PRS training. So you'll still go through the 72 hours. And then part of that certification process is continuing ed. And so one of the continuing education tracks will be youth peer specific. And we're hoping that is available in late 2024 is what we're shooting for there. Okay.
I'm so glad to hear that, because the PRS training, although I hear many positives about it, when our peer went to it, she was the only young person there. And so they talked briefly about it, but she had to kind of extrapolate what really made sense to her and then come back and talk about that. And so to hear that there's definitely a focus on this with the training and everything is really great.
Yeah. Yep. The next question was, will there be an age requirement for the certification? I don't know if we've thought through that all the way. However, when it all comes out and rolls out, we'll get everybody the information. Yeah, thanks for these great questions. So, let's talk a little bit about some of the challenges with hiring, any challenges with integrating a youth peer within clinical teams. I think we've started to touch on this a little bit. And do you have any thoughts on what supports are needed or training that can be helpful to address these challenges in your agency? And Stephanie, Tim, I think you guys were going to take the lead on this one.
Well, I think we talked a little bit, about that already, the challenges with hiring. Again, I looked at, some of the best practices, and it talks about making sure that, their roles are clear, that they're aware of what their role is, that other staff is aware of what their role is, the agency is aware of the role, and they kind of all mesh together. That being said, doesn't mean if we find out that, there's something else that could be done, making that change. But I think it's, I think with, integrating a youth peer is kind of setting up, what is that going to look like? Again, the boundaries, the parameters, so everybody's on the same page. And two, with stakeholders, sometimes I think we forget about letting stakeholders kind of know what's going on, and then they understand. So, we kind of made sure we did that to make sure that everybody was on the same page. And again, we did talk about the challenge of, you know, with people saying, you know, oh my gosh, you know, this individual looks like a client, which actually did happen. So.
All right. I'm not sure if Tim is trying to add or if he's still having some.
Yes, again, I do apologize, still fading in and out. Some of the challenges, again, just finding youth. I don't think we had a lot of young people to apply for the position. So I think really getting the word out there for that targeted population that we're looking for, I think we could do a better job about that. And I think, yeah, as far as integrating them with our team, it was not a problem because we're a small team. Again, we provide most of the services to court-involved youth, even though we take kids from outside of just the court. But it's a small team. It's myself as the manager. We have a court liaison, a case manager, and a therapist, and then Miss Allen, who does is our clinical supervisor. So it's a small team. So it wasn't a problem integrating the peer into that team. And I think everyone sees her as an equal partner. And as part of my job as the manager, I think is also, as I told her, as she's empowering the youth, part of my job is to empower her to as a part of the team.
So having a small team, having a team who's really person-centered, recovery-oriented, makes it a pretty easy integration, is what I'm hearing from Western Tidewater.
Yeah. We didn't have that like with what Christine had, where other professionals were kind of not embracing that because they either didn't understand the role or, you know, were misinformed. So we're kind of lucky that we are a small, very cohesive group. So that was, fortuitous for us. So.
Right. And sort of connected to this, but Christine, what training opportunities did you provide the youth peer? We've talked some about prepping the team and hiring the youth, but then what trainings do they receive? And are there additional trainings or information you would have liked to have provided now that you're a few months into this?
I think I threw everything in the kitchen sink at our youth peer support. And thankfully we have a good relationship. We can say, is this helpful, right? What would be helpful? So educating her on 988, something new, right? And ensuring that she knew how to get emergency support for the clients. We also have an emergency services program within our CSB too. And so making sure that she had that information. We did a lot of training on substance use disorders. So harm reduction with substance use, common substance use disorders and treatment, and then specific to adolescents, substance use in the family, what else? Opioid use disorders and treatment. Her recovery is primarily in mental health. And so that initially was one of our concerns, was like, oh, we really want her working with substance use, but she has mental health. And there wasn't a whole lot of lane changes with that. And then in talking with our consultant and talking with other people, it was like, she just needs the journey. She needs the recovery and she can learn about these things. And she agreed. And so a lot of substance use information, trauma-informed care, influences of trauma on substance use. We heard that this morning, best practices for peer supports in the clinical world. We did additional peer support trainings. I tried really hard to find some youth peer support trainings out there that she could go to. And then some safety concerns, right? Working with suicidal clients, self-harming clients, lethal means, right? What do you do with that? Although she's not a clinician, she still needs to have this information. We still need to be able to have these conversations in supervision. Like, she received a text the other day from somebody who was saying, I'm not doing well. I said, well, what was that like for you? And she said, I felt okay about it, right? And I'm glad that we had already talked about this. And then we also focused on special populations, LGBTQIA plus youth and substance use, working with transitional age youth who have their feet in both the youth world and the adult world. For us with the CSB, if you're still in high school, you're considered a youth client. But if you're 18, you can access more programs because you're 18 and the adult system has more adult programs. And so how do you navigate that, right? And so making sure she was also educated on some of those adult programs as well. And then also court-involved youth and ensuring that she was comfortable and familiar with that. And then just a lot of conversations about, she came forward and said, I think I'm going to need some support on boundaries. And so talking and making sure that is ongoing conversations. And then honestly, I think probably the most important and most valuable training was linking her to other youth peer supports. And Catherine is a youth peer support in Virginia. I'm not asking her to join us, but if you're monitoring the chat, she's putting in there like, hey, this is what I think, right, as that role. And so Catherine is one that is supporting our youth peer in addition to a couple other people. And so I think that's been invaluable that she has that group because we don't have it within our system right now. And so, yeah, kitchen sink and everything that went with it. And then conversations about what's helpful or not. And then when things come up, I'm like, let me see if I can find something on that. Right. And then so constantly trying to keep my finger on the pulse and ensure and asking the questions for her. What would be helpful? What was that encounter like? You know, oh, that was a really challenging parent. Okay, I know we have some of those trainings. Let's get you to that training. So just continuing, none that I would say I should have done it before, but now just making sure that I'm listening and asking the right questions so that she feels supported.
Yeah. One of the thoughts that came up for me, Christine, especially working with youth is, you know, how do you set those boundaries with youth that don't, in a way that doesn't remind them of rejection or abandonment wounds? Like, how do you clearly, Catherine, I can see your face. How do you clearly articulate, like, I can't or I won't, and not activate feelings of distance and disconnect? What an interesting challenge for youth support partners in particular. So it just came to me while you were talking, so I wanted to voice it.
And I think it goes back to building that relationship.
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
If you have that relationship, you can pretty much say anything in a respectful way and somebody can hear you. But if you don't have that relationship, absolutely. Like if this is the first time that you're reaching out and you're, forget it, you're done. Street cred gone. But if you build that relationship and you're really focused on doing that, then I think setting those boundaries is a little bit easier.
Yep.
Also, Karen, I think training that has to be included, how to take care of themselves. I mean, our peer specialist is in school, has to go through the PSR training, learning a new job. So how do you take care of yourself? You need to learn those skills in the beginning.
Yeah. Yes, that's a really great point. Almost every code of ethics I've seen relative to peer work is the number one ethical responsibility is to prioritize and maintain your own recovery and wellness as priority number one. So yeah, that's a really great point.
You know, and I think too, having that conversation, you know, like you do with all peers is if you trigger or get triggered or you feel like, you know, your recovery journey is, you know, you're going backwards, is how to address that and how to talk about that and how to get the support you need. You know, and again, it comes down to relationship, you know, where the peer feels, you know, safe enough to express that. So,
Yeah.
you know, because I mean, it does happen. I've worked with adult peers where, you know, definitely, you know, something happened and, they crashed and burned, and, we had to help pull them out of that and get what they needed. So.
Yeah. I know I'm still monitoring the chat. There are some questions I think we can tie into our pre-planned questions and some that we'll get to at the end. So just wanted everyone to know I'm not ignoring your comments or questions in the chat. And I'm going to tie one from the chat into this next question for Stephanie and Tim, which is the ongoing challenges or barriers that your agency continues to face from stakeholders, from families. And the question in the chat was, is it difficult to get parents to sign on with having a YSP because they're so young or for whatever reason, really? And then any potential tips and tricks of the trade that you've learned so far to address these challenges and barriers?
Well, I know the one thing that we've talked about is, especially for these court-involved youth, they have so many service providers. They've got to go to anger management. They've got to do this. They've got to do that. They've got to do that. And it's like you call them and they're like, who are you? What am I? So I think that's the other challenge that we just deal with inherently in working with youth is, they're trying to go to school, and mom might have other children, that she's trying to work with to get them to appointments. So I think that, that's the other, like, who is this other person coming? We've got enough people where we can't even keep track of them. And again, somebody who kind of maybe looks like their child, because they're closer in age. So that, that is definitely a challenge that we're working with. And I had another thought, but it got lonely and left. So no, did you? Oh, I think he was trying to talk. But, I think overall, families, and especially for our truancy board, they've been really on board with having this youth peer working with us. And again, the courts are very, very pleased that that's something that we're adding to, our service array. It was definitely, something that we wanted, and, we made sure that we were getting.
I think, for me, I think about how do you explain the role of a peer? How do you explain it to a youth? How do you explain it to a parent? How do you help them understand what some of the differences are? I completely agree with what Stephanie said. Like, some of these families have a lot of people already on their treatment team.
Yeah.
And so having to kind of sit through and filter, okay, this one is for this one is for that. And then I also think, as an agency, which so far haven't come across, so another thing to ponder is, when is it too many providers? Mm-hmm. And what do you do with that, right? And so I think we found a little more success when, like, we have a family support partner involved in the case. The parents tend to understand, like, oh, this is for my kid. And yes, we'll still be in contact, but it's similar. And if those families have embraced a family peer support partner, if they haven't embraced a family peer support partner, we're also kind of running into that challenge and explaining what those differences are. But so far, we've been pretty successful in helping explain that. And then I think also our peer brings just a lot of patience. And so, this one particular client that she recently saw, she's had to explain herself like 3 or 4 times. And that's okay. And she's okay with that. And then helping them kind of navigate where do we go from here. So I think that explanation, that communication right in the beginning is really critical. And you have to think, like, for our peer, we have a public safety referral notified that Joe Smith has had a suspected overdose on this particular day. Here's the parents' information and here's the kids' information. And that might be all we have, right? Mm-hmm. And so we're cold calling saying, we've received this information, blah, 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 blah. And so parents are just like, whoa, wait, oh, okay, understand that. And then also she's cold calling at a different time and is looking for the peer. And so this is when a family is in crisis also. And so it's walking that fine line of making sure that you're communicating in a way that when a family is in crisis, when a youth is in crisis, that they can hear and they can understand, and then also following up.
Yeah. Charlie Brown's teacher comes to mind. Like, I think when we talk to young people, the first like 3 or 4 times we talk to them, we're like, womp, 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 right? So until the young person starts to really experience this youth support partner as different, like it's one thing to tell a youth, I am different than, to experience it as different than, and then all of a sudden it's like, wait, who are you again? Why are you here? Like, what role are you? And then they can really, it starts to sink in a little bit different. We're no longer just womp womping. So just going back to that point of like, I've had to introduce myself 4 times, right? Yeah. I think it's the first time they're really starting to experience you as someone who operates a little differently than those first 7 therapists I've seen, and the 6 case managers I've had, and the 4 probation officers, and the 3 school count, like all those people who have been involved. So, yeah.
But if I could speak to that, Karen, with our peer support person, we let her assist with our after school program. And even when she's sitting down interacting with them, you can just see the difference. The whole environment is different. There's a calmness about it. And I think that's because she's able to interact with them on their level, as opposed to a clinical person who again is just trying to give them instructions.
Yep. Very nice. For our next question, we are going to focus on how can peer support programs specifically target the development of resiliency in youth with substance use disorders? And what strategies or activities have you found your YSP to be using and being effective in achieving this goal?
So resiliency, the ability to bounce back from big things that can weigh us down, can be really challenging. Some people have it just innately within them, and then others have to learn and develop it. And so our peer is helping youth find purpose in life. What are their goals? What do they want? How do they get there? You know, they may think the journey is just from A to Z, and it's okay if you're on a winding road to get there. Helping them believe in themselves, that they themselves have purpose, but also that they are valued. I think they can also help with developing a healthy social network, having those conversations about, you know, sounds like it was a little dicey with hanging out with so-and-so this weekend, you know, how'd you navigate that? And our peer just recently had that conversation, and turned out to be a really good one. This kid said, well, I don't know anybody else. Like, what do I do if I want to get out of my house? And so they're starting to look at what are some things that this youth is interested in. Where can we find some supports? Where can we find funding to get them into a hobby or something that they're interested in? Helping our peers, helping youth embrace change, and change is hard, and often it's difficult to see. It takes a long time to notice big changes, and so celebrating those little changes, like for this particular youth, you went out with so-and-so and you didn't use, right? That's a big win. And so you need that cheerleader that says, wow, I'm really proud of you. I know that's hard. Promoting self-care and ensuring that youth have access to be able to do that. Helping develop problem-solving skills. I think she's doing that a lot. Offering hope is I think something that is in everything that she does with the youth. That connectedness. Sometimes I think these youth are very isolated. And so having somebody that they feel connected to. Somebody who always has a positive outlook and is just a support. No matter what you're saying, that person is still just like, it's okay, we're still walking. And and then we're gonna figure this out. So we have our youth doing our substance use treatment group. So it's twice a week. So she sits in on one meeting a week. And so she's also connecting with the youth in that way and is able to bring her lived experiences into that, which I think has been really helpful. Our substance use group is not as effective as I would really like it to be. It is virtual and has been for a while. And I think we need to really take a look at that and shift it around a little bit. Our agency is very large. We have 4 youth outpatient sites in 4 different locations in Fairfax County. And so it's like moving the Titanic a little bit sometimes when we need to make these shifts, but I think that would be helpful. And then also having her attend every once a month, going to a site team meeting with the clinical staff, and so being there. And she is not afraid to pipe up. She will point things out, which I think is really helpful for us and the clinical team to kind of keep things in mind. And so those are some of the things that we've been doing, but also, just continuing to figure out, how does this individual bounce back, right? Because it's not cookie cutter, it doesn't work for everybody. And so that, I think, goes back to the relationship and what do you know about these kids that you're working with, and how do you move forward? So that's where we are.
Yeah. That ability to share that resilience, recovery, wellness isn't absent of mistakes and challenges, and to have a connected accountability from a YSP. So we're going to look at this and talk about it, not in a shaming, blaming way, but in a, this thing happened, what can we learn from it? How do we move through it? I've been there myself, like just that level of positivity towards the things that are going well, and positivity and hope about the challenges that come up and what we can learn and grow from them. And yeah, so I just think what a nice job articulating that, Christine. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah, and kind of a similar question for Stephanie and Tim. In what ways do you see youth peer support enhancing self-efficacy among participants? Do you have any examples of like the empowerment strategies that have yielded positive results?
Yeah, I did want to talk a little about, with our youth that are, in the criminal justice system is, I think part of, that something the peer can do is to show these youth that there are things that they can control. Because, I think when a lot of kids, especially when they're young and they go into the system early, and they have to deal with probation, they have to deal with detention, they've got to deal with law enforcement, they kind of feel like they really don't have any control. And then there's that feeling of hopelessness and helplessness. So seeing a peer who has persevered in their recovery and has gotten some control over, is a wonderful way to role model that for these kids. So they do have something to look forward to. They do have a future, getting them to be goal oriented, instead of just, we had a young girl in our behavioral health docket. She's, 20, around that age. And she had so many, the court and probation were wanting her to do this. And finally she called her clinician and said, you know what? I'm going to go back and serve my 5 years because I'm completely overwhelmed. I can't do this anymore. And she was a young woman. She has a toddler. So I'm thinking, how bad must it have been for her to make that phone call to her clinician and say, you know what, y'all defeated me. I can't do anymore. So at least in that case, I know it's not our youth, she's in a different program, but we were able to wrap services around her and kind of combine some of those requirements that she had to do so it wasn't so overwhelming for her. So I think, we forget, and these are children, their brain is still developing. They're still trying to learn the world and their place in it. And, giving them a sense of self and control. I think that's really important. That I think the peer can help them do that.
Thanks, Stephanie. Christine, any additional thoughts? Or Tim, if you're trying to talk, we'll see if we can hear you.
I think just continuing to support client voice and choice. And really for a peer language, I'm learning this and I'm practicing individual voice and choice and how important that is. And
Well,
that's what they bring. Go ahead, Tim.
no, I was about to say, at this point, we don't really have any examples. We had identified 3 individuals for the peer caseload. 2 of them were put in detention before she actually got a chance to start the service. And the third one, I think she's just starting to develop a relationship with him at this point. But we've identified, I think, 3 new cases that she will be taking on. So hopefully we'll be able to talk about the examples of the strategies that have worked in the very near future.
Yeah. Thanks, Tim. So yeah, I mean, you are both very early on in this. If there are any success stories or specific instances you want to share, please feel free. But otherwise, just what hopes do you have about the successes that this youth peer will bring to your adolescent substance use programming?
I have a couple of successes that I think are important to share. And I'm pleased to say that we have a couple of successes. So the very first client that was signed to our peer support received a couple of texts, and it was clear that the text had been read, but not responded to. And it took about 2 weeks or so for this particular youth to respond. And in the meantime, the youth was like, oh, I know she's read them. What do I do? And just hang tight. It's okay. You know, we're still going to be there when or if she chooses to respond. And so she did respond, and it was a very positive response. And she was quickly able to schedule something face-to-face with this particular youth and their guardian, and have since signed up for services, which I think is really great. And then there was another youth who last week she said, oh, I think I'm being ghosted by this one. What do we do? And this particular one is also ghosting the clinical team as well after a non-fatal opioid overdose. And so we are concerned about her. And I said, well, you know, we're still going to do our process. And so if it ends up that she doesn't enter services, at least she knows we're here and we are available. And about 3 days later, she reached out. This was the one that was in a little bit of a crisis, not feeling well at all. But the fact that she reached out to the peer, I think, is just a win-win, because there were plenty of opportunities for her to look for other supports, but she went to our peer. And so I think, and I said to our peer, it says something about what you've been sending her, what you have been communicating to her, is that you are here to listen and that you could be somebody who could support her. And so those are two, there's big successes in my head. And I'm sure in the future there will be plenty of big successes, but just that initial stage of engaging, because we have a peer, she's so enthusiastic. She wants to get out there, you know, give me 50 cases and I'll be great. And we've been slowly getting referrals for her. And so that's been a little bit of a frustration, I think, for her and myself. And so to have these experiences where youth are engaging, the parents are, you know, willing to have the supports for the youth and everything. So successes along the way, and they'll continue.
I think we have a similar story to Christina, the youth that our peer specialist is working with. She had been trying to schedule appointments with him, and he would not keep the appointment. But this past week, I think Friday, the peer had actually got off from work, and he called her. And I say that to say, if success is measured in steps, then we'll take that initial step that he reached out to her, and when he was in crisis. and she was able to help him through that crisis situation. She talked to him about our emergency service number, and afterwards she called me. I think she just needed this support because that was probably the first time she's had to deal with a crisis situation. So I saw success in that. The youth did reach out to her after many attempts where she had tried to engage him, and that she felt process the whole situation.
All right. Well, thank you guys. We had a few more questions that did come up in the chat that we have time to respond to. And if anybody else has additional questions, please keep putting them in the chat and we'll get through as many as we can. One of the questions was, how are you measuring the youth's recovery now and the YSP's recovery as well?
I think in Fairfax, to measure the youth's recovery, we're just looking at engagement and hoping to plant seeds. Of course, would love for these kids to come into services, but as we heard earlier today, and as all of you I'm sure have experienced, it can take many, many times of wah, 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 Charlie Brown's teacher, before somebody says, okay, let me give it a try. And so just that small engagement, I think, is a win. And then also just going from there. And recovery is not linear. It's windy. And there are a lot of bumps in the road. And so just continuing to offer that hope that even though something happened this past weekend, we can still move forward. And so being non-judgmental and supportive, I think, is really where we are right now, and just trying to get that engagement and making sure that people know where the resources are. So if it's not with us, that's okay. But you know where resources are. And then finally, also not wanting to have the youth have a negative experience with therapy, with treatment. You know, the parent who says my kid needs to be in it and the kid says, no, I don't want to. We try our best, but then we have to say to the parent, they're not ready. And we know that's really hard, but we want them to be able to consider coming back. And so we're not going to push it. We're going to, again, individual voice and choice. We have to go with that. Still too new to say how are we measuring the peer recovery journey? I hope that we just continue to build a really good relationship, that she's able to say, hey, white flag, need a little bit of a break, but then also ensuring that I'm creating that environment that allows her to do that. She needs to, just like in therapy, she needs to feel safe with me in order to be able to say, this is what's happening. And I don't push anything. I don't ask for her story. What she chooses to share, she chooses to share. And I'm very honored that she shares it. And I tell her that.
So I know I'm supposed to just be the facilitator, but Christine, I have to share my own lesson learned was when I first hired a youth support partner and thought about this question of recovery and wellness. And I was like, what does it say about me that I would only ask my YSP and not all the other staff that I supervise? Who am I to assume that the rest of my staff don't need to also have conversations about recovery and wellness, and how are they striking that balance, and how will I know if it's not going well? And it really opened my eyes to what am I bringing to the table, knowing that this person was hired because of their lived experience, and am I treating them differently because of that? And I'm going to ask my staff not to treat them differently. So I need to live that, breathe that too. And so it was this whole, I don't know, coming to realization about lots of things about myself too. And I think a tool that's often used in the recovery space, I'm going to try to talk and drop this in the chat at the same time, are the domains of wellness. And so this was a resource that I had started to use with myself and all my staff and some of the youth that we worked with to start talking about there are multiple domains to wellness, and you can be doing physically well, but not emotionally well, or you can be doing relationally well, but not spiritually well. Like there's a lot of different elements to this. And this also allows people to start exploring what matters to them most, right? Like we heard Tanya share her domain of strength is her spiritual wellness domain. That's what she leans into. And this really starts a conversation about like which domain maybe is your strong point, which domain maybe is a challenge for you, which domain is the one that puts you over the edge. Like it's just a great starting point. So if you find it useful, copy the link and start those conversations. But I would have conversations as an agency rather than just a peer focus. So just lessons learned along the way, supervising. Yeah.
Aaron, that is a
Helpful.
great
Thanks for
point.
sharing.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah.
I had a lot of like like the little emoji with his little mind blowing. That's when I started to supervise youth support partners. Yeah.
Well, I've also had to bring my own, like confidence wise, be like, no, I too can bring something to this, right? Even though I'm in a different lane than she is. But at first I was like, oh my gosh, I don't know. And there's another supervisor from the adult peer team. So we're kind of tag teaming together. And she finally said, Christine, you've been in this field for a really long time. Like, why are you questioning everything? And I was like, because I want to make sure I'm doing it right. And she was like, you'll be okay. And so that too, it took a while for me to kind of let that go and be like, wait, I'm bringing my own lived experience to this. And so we together can figure this out.
Yeah. All right. So there's a question, Jessica, thank you for this. The idea of recovery capital, very interesting and relevant to being able to sustain individuals in recovery. So there is a recovery capital assessment for adolescents that's being developed. And just the question of, are you guys using anything, something like the assessment for recovery capital with your youth and youth peers?
We are not, but open to ideas. Right? I think it's so new for us that we haven't considered that. But thank you for sharing. That sounds great.
Yeah, and I think the challenge that everyone in this room faces is there are lots of assessment tools and surveys and screening tools for adults, right? And I think what we know is that we can't just pick up the adult substance use services spectrum and continuum and just apply it to adolescents. Like it isn't apples to apples. And so, you know, focusing on a recovery capital assessment specific for adolescents needs to be done because it is different for adolescents than it is for adults. So I think it's a challenge that all of us in this room face is having all the resources and tools at our fingertips to really successfully serve adolescents in this substance use services continuum. Assessment sounds scary. Thank you for that, Catherine.
That's really great feedback.
Any other questions for the panel or anything that you feel like I missed from the chat? Oh, how do young people hear about this training? The specific youth peer training isn't out yet. When it is fully developed, we will send it out through our networks. People will have knowledge of when it's going to be hosted and what that will all look like. And again, it will start with young people going through the 72-hour peer recovery specialist training first.
Can I ask the group? I'm wondering how many of you have youth peer support? Do we have time, Karen?
We have a few minutes, absolutely.
Okay, I'm just wondering if those on here, if you have youth peer supports or your agency is looking into it.
Oh,
Great, look at that. Look into
Yeah. I was just interested, would Catherine be willing to just speak a little bit about what you heard today? Since you're the expert.
Really quick. Yeah. So I work for Family Support Partners of Virginia. And so we finally just hired our 4th YSP. My understanding is there's only like 6 or 7 in the whole state. So Karen, super excited about the peer support training because we need more. Everything y'all were sharing, I was like, yes, it's so hard to find YSPs because of all the reasons y'all stated. It was really cool hearing y'all's perspective though. I loved it. Thank you. Like as an agency perspective. I don't know. I love the work. It's hard. Everything y'all shared, ditto. Being in the work and being questioned regularly. I tell people the majority of my role is explaining what my role is. Literally what I do on a day-to-day basis, multiple times a day, to the youth, to the family, to providers, to funders, all the above. So it's hard to find people that are young and active in their own recovery, that's willing in a place to be willing to share that, because it's draining. Like it's exhausting to share that experience sometimes. So having support from supervisors is essential. So thank y'all for everything you're doing. I really enjoyed this. This was fun. Spread the word.
Thank you, Catherine.
Catherine, I appreciate you sharing that because I think, even watching Tanya this morning, like she got choked up at some point in time, right? And it doesn't mean that she's not in a good place in her recovery and wellness. It will always be an emotional story. Like what she went through was difficult. And so I think being able to bring that piece to all of us that like, it is draining and I may still get emotional at times when I share my story, but that doesn't mean it's a red flag for where I am in my recovery or wellness or that kind of stuff. And so I admire the courage and strength and the gift that peers are willing to give to individuals who are walking earlier in their path to help them move along. So just wanted to say that.
I agree. Not everybody is willing to share their own story of recovery. I have a client at my private practice, and she's got a t-shirt for almost every mental health saying, diagnosis or whatever. And she, she'll come in and go, oh, you got a new t-shirt. And she's like, yeah. And she wears it proudly. And she finds herself having these conversations with others. And then she'll talk about how bad she feels for people who feel like they can't talk about their own journey. And so I think that peers bring that added ability to be vulnerable and to share, and I greatly appreciate it. And I know the youth are appreciating it in Fairfax. So,
well, I mean, it's like having to lay your junk out every day to everybody. I mean, that's, who wants to do that? I mean, so it does take a lot of courage, a lot of resilience. I don't know if I could. so.
And Karen, if I could add, because I may have missed out when you were talking about the providers and their response to the peer specialists. With our peer, I was able to take her to the truancy committee. She's met the judges that, are in charge of the juvenile and domestic cases. She's met the POs. And they all were appreciative. I was telling Stephanie last week, it's almost like a war zone. And I'm not trying to minimize the war zone, but they're looking for help. and they were willing and want any help that we could bring. And so they were willing to and receptive to of the peer specialists and look forward to working with her. Hopefully we'll be able to bring about the results, but the providers and the families are looking for additional support and help.
Yeah. No, I think we definitely are in a place in Virginia where adolescent substance use is being focused on, talked about. There's been a lot of negative news about substance use and overdoses and all that kind of stuff. And the benefit to that is I do think people are open to new experiences, to different ideas, to creative ideas, because what we have been doing to reach youth and adolescents has not been working. So, how do we get there? Yeah. So a big thank you to all of our panelists for coming this morning and being willing to share what's happening at their agencies and supervising youth support partners. Thank you so much for being such an engaged breakout group, all the questions, the comments, even just the nonverbals, the head noddings and the just all of that. Very much appreciated.